I live in a town where everyone locks their doors and goes to bed before midnight on New Year's Eve. It's not out of tradition or exhaustion, it's survival. By 11:30 p.m., the streets are empty, lights extinguished, and silence falls like a shroud. Even the stray dogs disappear. As a child, I'd ask my parents, "Why doesn't anyone stay up to celebrate New Year's?" They'd always give me the same answer. "That's just the way it's always been." Their tone left no room for argument, but it never satisfied me. Why was it the way it's always been? What was everyone so afraid of? My curiosity grew as I did. The silence of our New Year's nights was oppressive, unnatural. No one dared to peek outside. Once, I overheard hushed voices during a family gathering. "He broke the rule," someone whispered. "Never saw the new year." They noticed me eavesdropping and immediately changed the subject. But the seed of fear had already been planted. What really happened after midnight? Last New Year's Eve, I decided to find out. That evening, the usual routine unfolded. Dinner at 7, family time until 9, and then off to bed. But this time, I pretended to sleep. I lay there, heart racing, listening as the town settled into its eerie stillness. At exactly 11:59 p.m., the world outside became unnervingly quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and crawls under your skin. When the clock struck midnight, I opened my eyes. My room was cloaked in darkness, but the faint glow of moonlight seeped through the curtains, painting the walls with pale streaks. I sat up slowly, my bed creaking in protest. The sound seemed deafening in the oppressive quiet. I tiptoed to my bedroom door and cracked it open. The hallway was empty, the air cold and heavy. My parents' room was just a few steps away. I crept toward it, my bare feet soundless against the wooden floor. Peeking inside, I saw them lying in bed, their faces calm and undisturbed. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned back toward my room, I felt it, a presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear, but I knew it was there. The air grew colder, suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to hide, but my feet refused to move. And then I heard it, a voice, low and guttural, slicing through the silence like a blade. "Why are you awake?" My blood turned to ice. I tried to convince myself it was my mother, but a glance back at their room confirmed my worst fear. They were still asleep, their breathing slow and steady. The voice came again, louder, angrier. "Why are you not sleeping? You were supposed to be asleep." The sound was coming closer now. My chest tightened as I turned the corner. And then I saw it. It wasn't my mother, not my father, not anything remotely human. The figure was impossibly tall, its skeletal frame draped in shadow. Its skin, pale and stretched taut, seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Where its face should have been, there was only a void, a swirling black emptiness that made my stomach churn. "It's all your fault," it hissed, its voice echoing unnaturally. "You should have stayed asleep." Panic overtook me. I turned and ran, my legs trembling, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Behind me, I heard it following, its footsteps impossibly loud in the silence. I barely made it to my room before slamming the door shut. The knocking started immediately. Loud, violent. Each blow shook the door, the hinges creaking under the force. I pressed my back against it, tears streaming down my face, praying it would go away. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. For hours, I stood there, trembling, waiting for the next sound. When nothing came, I thought it was over. Slowly, I opened the door, peeking out into the hallway. The world outside wasn't the same. The air was thick and suffocating, the walls warped and discolored. Shadows writhed unnaturally, and the faint hum of a clock caught my attention. I looked at it and felt my stomach drop. The hands weren't moving. It was midnight, and it always would be. I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Weeks? Years? Time doesn't exist anymore. Not in this place. The town is empty now. No parents, no neighbors, no life. Just me, wandering the streets, searching for an escape that doesn't exist. I haven't eaten or drunk anything since that night. Yet I'm not dead. I should be dead, but I'm not. My body has changed. I've grown taller, impossibly thin. My skin stretches tightly over my bones, and my reflection in broken glass reveals the truth. My face is gone, replaced by a void, a black nothingness. I don't feel human anymore. My memories of life before are fading. I've grown angrier with each passing moment. At myself, at the town, at everything. And then, one day, I saw something. A boy. He was small, frightened. I watched as he tiptoed down the hallway, peeking into his parents' room. The sight filled me with rage. "Why are you awake?" The boy froze, his wide eyes locking onto mine. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't watching him. I was watching myself. And now I understood. I had stayed awake. And now I was the one who ensured no one else ever would. Story number 2. New Year's Eve 2019 had promised to be unforgettable for Emma and her friends. They had chosen her family's remote cabin in the woods to celebrate. Secluded, picturesque, and a perfect escape from the chaos of city life. Surrounded by snow-covered trees, the cabin had always been Emma's favorite getaway spot, its rustic charm and roaring fireplace making it feel like a safe haven. The group of 5, Emma, her boyfriend Ryan, her best friend Lily, Lily's boyfriend Mark, and their mutual friend Sam, arrived early in the evening, carrying bags of snacks, games, and champagne. By 8 p.m., the cabin was filled with the sound of laughter and music as they made toasts, talked about resolutions, and reminisced about the year. Outside, the night was bitterly cold, the wind howling softly through the trees. At 11:30 p.m., as they gathered around the living room for a game of charades, Emma offered to grab more snacks from the kitchen. The others playfully booed her for missing her turn, but she waved them off with a grin. The kitchen, just around the corner, was dimly lit, with a single hanging light casting shadows on the wooden walls. As Emma opened the pantry, her eyes drifted to the window above the sink. That's when she saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by shadows. It was tall, motionless, and facing the cabin. The light from the kitchen reflected faintly off what looked like the pale, featureless surface of a face or a mask. Emma's breath hitched. She blinked, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing, before shaking her head. "It's just your imagination," she told herself. "The shadows, the snow, you're overthinking." Grabbing the snacks, she returned to the living room, forcing a smile as she handed out bowls of chips and candy. She didn't mention what she'd seen, convincing herself there was no point in worrying anyone over nothing. As midnight approached, they began the countdown. 10, 9, 8, their voices rang out, full of excitement. At the stroke of 12, they cheered, clinking glasses and shouting, "Happy New Year!" The moment felt warm and carefree, but Emma couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from earlier. The mood shifted when the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then the cabin was plunged into darkness. "Whoa, power outage?" Sam asked, pulling out his phone for light. "It's probably the wiring," Ryan said. "This place is old. Let me check the breaker." Mark grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and handed it to Ryan. As the beam of light cut through the darkness, Emma noticed how quiet the room had become. The usual hum of the wind outside felt distant, almost muted. The only sounds were their breathing and the creak of the wooden floor as Ryan headed toward the basement. Then came the first knock. It was faint, just a soft tap on the front door. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered. "Yeah," Emma replied, her voice barely audible. Mark, always the bold one, stood up. "It's probably just the wind or something. I'll check." Emma's stomach churned as Mark approached the door. He unlocked it and swung it open, letting in a rush of icy air. But there was nothing outside, just darkness and snow. "See? Nothing to worry about," he said, shutting the door with a chuckle. But the moment he sat back down, another knock echoed, this time from the back door. The group stared at each other, unease growing. "Okay, this isn't funny," Ryan said, returning from the basement. Before anyone could respond, a third knock came, this time from the window behind them. The knocks grew louder and more frequent, coming from every side of the cabin. Windows, walls, doors, an unrelenting cacophony of sound that made the group huddle together in fear. "Who's there?" Mark shouted, brandishing the flashlight like a weapon. No answer came. The flashlight flickered, its beam weakening before it died entirely, plunging them into pitch blackness. In the suffocating silence that followed, Emma swore she heard breathing. It was slow, heavy, and deliberate, coming from just outside the living room window. "Stay together," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. The knock stopped abruptly, leaving only the oppressive quiet. The group sat frozen, afraid to move or make a sound. Then came the footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of boots on snow circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. The steps would pause for a moment, then resume, as if whoever or whatever was out there was watching and waiting. Emma gripped Ryan's arm, her nails digging into his skin. Her mind raced. Who could be out here in the middle of nowhere? And why were they tormenting them like this? The footsteps grew fainter, fading into the distance, until all was silent once more. It wasn't until dawn broke that the group dared to move. Exhausted and shaken, they ventured outside to assess the situation. The sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. Deep footprints surrounded the cabin, circling it repeatedly. But there were no tracks leading to or away from the cabin, only endless loops around the perimeter. "It's like they came from nowhere," Mark whispered, his bravado completely gone. Emma stared at the woods, half expecting to see the figure from the night before. But the trees were silent and still. Whatever had visited them that night had vanished with the first light of day, leaving only its haunting presence behind. They packed up and left the cabin immediately, vowing never to return. To this day, Emma can't explain what happened that New Year's Eve, but she knows one thing for certain. Something or someone had been watching them, and it wasn't human. Story number 3. New Year's Eve 2015 wasn't shaping up to be anything special for Liam. He was stuck working the graveyard shift at a small, 24-hour gas station tucked away in a rural stretch of highway. While his friends celebrated at parties and watched fireworks, he spent the evening stacking shelves, ringing up the occasional customer, and sipping bad coffee to stay awake. The station was surrounded by endless fields, with no nearby houses or businesses. The only source of light came from the flickering neon sign out front and the dim fluorescent bulbs inside. The roads were quiet that night, save for the rare car passing through. By 11:45 p.m., Liam was bored out of his mind. He leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, when the station's landline phone rang. The sharp sound startled him. The phone hardly ever rang, especially at this hour. Thinking it might be his manager or someone needing directions, he picked up. "Hello?" For a moment, all he heard was static. Frowning, he repeated, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The static crackled, and then he heard it, a voice, faint and raspy, barely audible. "They're coming," the voice whispered. A chill ran down Liam's spine. "Who's coming?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. But the line went dead. Liam stood there, the receiver still pressed to his ear, staring at the phone like it might come to life. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it as a prank or a misdial, but the voice lingered in his mind. There had been something unnerving about it, something too real to ignore. Shrugging it off, he returned to the counter and checked the clock. 11:58 p.m., almost midnight. As he watched the seconds tick by, the station's automated chime alerted him to a car pulling into the lot. He looked up to see an old, battered sedan rolling to a stop near Pump 2. The headlights were blindingly bright, casting long, distorted shadows across the station's walls. Liam squinted, trying to make out the driver. A man stepped out, tall and thin, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned, dirty clothes, a tattered suit jacket and slacks that seemed decades out of style. The man moved toward the station doors, his steps slow and deliberate. Liam immediately felt uneasy. There was something off about the way the man walked, as if he were gliding just above the ground. The door chimed as the man entered. He didn't make eye contact or say a word, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Liam cleared his throat. "Evening. Need any help?" The man didn't respond. He walked past the counter and into the aisles, disappearing from view. Liam's unease deepened. He leaned over the counter, trying to see where the man had gone. Minutes passed, and he didn't return to the front. "Hey, buddy, you okay back there?" Liam called out. No answer. His nerves fraying, Liam stepped out from behind the counter. He cautiously walked toward the back of the store, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. When he reached the last aisle, his heart skipped a beat. The aisle was empty. The man was gone. Confused, Liam quickly checked the store's only exit, the front door. It hadn't opened since the man entered. There was no way he could have left without Liam hearing or seeing him. His pulse racing, Liam hurried back to the counter and pulled up the security camera feed. The footage showed the man entering the store, but as he walked down the aisle, something impossible happened. He faded. One moment, he was there, his figure clear and solid. The next, he seemed to dissolve into thin air, disappearing completely. Liam stared at the screen, his hands trembling. Then the phone rang again. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a knife. Liam hesitated, his hand hovering over the receiver. Finally, he picked it up, his voice shaking. "Hello!" Static greeted him once more, followed by the same faint, raspy voice. "They're here." Before Liam could respond, the station lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for several seconds. When they came back on, the air felt different, colder, heavier, like all the warmth had been sucked out of the room. Liam's breath came in shallow gasps as he grabbed his jacket and bolted for the door. As he locked the station behind him, he glanced back through the glass, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The man was standing at the counter, staring at Liam with empty, hollow eyes. His face was pale and gaunt, and his lips were twisted into a faint, unnatural smile. Liam didn't wait. He jumped into his car, started the engine, and sped off down the highway, not daring to look back. The next day, he called his manager to quit. When asked why, he simply said, "I can't work nights anymore." But the story doesn't end there. Several months later, Liam ran into a former coworker who still worked at the station. He casually mentioned the incident, hoping for some rational explanation. Instead, the coworker's face turned pale. "You saw him too?" the coworker asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It turned out that Liam wasn't the first employee to encounter the strange man or to receive eerie phone calls. Over the years, others had reported similar incidents, always on quiet nights around midnight. And though no one could explain who or what the man was, one thing was certain. Once you saw him, you never forgot.